Preparing yourself for summer flying in extreme weather, preparing your drones, keeping your drones cool in transit, and more importantly, keeping yourself well for your own well-being. Let's do this. So hello and welcome once again here on the channel, and today's video is all about flying in extreme heat or flying hot weather conditions. So the DJI Mini 3 Pro is a classic example. Now we all know that these little fellas can overheat, even doing software updates or firmware updates, and we know that they can overheat just sat there in your house doing a firmware update. And the same goes for when it's out flying in the summer. So a couple of things, a couple of tips if you like to kind of like combat that. Now the larger drones, the Mavic 3 series, like the Mavic Classic that I fly, and I must admit this is an absolute beast. All behind me over there is the Air 2S that's sat there on the bench that doesn't get much flying now. More about that a little later in the video. So a couple of tips for you for when you're thinking of going out in extreme heat and flying. Tip number one, keeping your drone cool. Now we're not just on about flying, we're on about keeping it cool whilst it's in your car. Now the inside temperature of a car can double the outside temperature. So as you can see in this little clip here, earlier on today, it's about 20 degrees outside. I put a thermometer inside the car on the dashboard, and as you can see, it was off the scale. It was over 60 degrees inside my car, just sat on the driveway, and that temperature gauge was only in there for 20 minutes. So if you're traveling on location like I do, I travel all over the place, getting different footage of different places, and you might stop off at a restaurant or services and think, I'll grab a bite to eat. You might be in there half an hour. Just remember that your drone is in the car and it's getting hot. It's sat in the bag. It's getting hot, it's getting sweaty. It could be damaging the electronics inside the drone. Who knows? I can't prove that, but it's a possibility. So one of the things to combat that, you can use a cooler bag like this one. You can pop your drone bag inside there, seal it up, put it in the boot of your car. It's nice and shady in there. Or put it somewhere where it's close to your air conditioning. There's another good tip. So keeping it cool, that's what it's all about. And like I say, temperatures in the car, horrendous. They can be horrendous. You've heard these stories about dogs dying in hot cars. So just a quick tip. Tip number two, when we're actually flying, when you get out the car, get the drone out and leave it in a shaded area for a period of time. If it feels warm, leave it in a shaded area. And that's the best place to stand whilst you're flying, if you can. I know it's impossible sometimes if you're in the open field and there's no shaded areas, but if you can, get yourself into a shaded area and keep the controller cool. It's not just the drones that get hot, it's these guys as well. And maybe a sunscreen. Some of you use a sunscreen. I don't bother. I've got installed on here a matte screen protector, which takes a lot of the glare off that controller. But it doesn't stop it from getting hot, but it does help whilst you're flying. I'll leave a link to those screen protectors down in the description if you're interested. Tip number three is not just about keeping your equipment cool, but it's also about keeping yourself well for your own well-being. So make sure that you've got a hat on if it's a hot sunny day. Keep the sun off your head. The last thing you want to be doing is getting sunstroke. And talking of sun, make sure that you cover your skin with some sun cream or some sunblock if you're susceptible to sunburn. I'm one of the lucky ones. I've got olive skin, also I've been told, and I don't tend to go red, I go naturally brown, but it still can make you highly dehydrated. And that brings you on to tip number three, is make sure you take plenty of water with you or drinks to keep yourself hydrated. So one of the things whilst you're flying, tip number four, is to keep these little fellas moving. It's all about airflow. We just pop this cover off. So you've got air vents on the front of the Mini 3 Pro and the DJI Mini 2, and lights and the DJI Mini 3, and the airflow needs to go through the front and it comes out the back here. Now on the larger drones, you're quite lucky in the fact that they're fan assisted and they'll keep nice and cool whilst you're flying. So tip number 5 is to keep this little fella moving all the time. I know you like to hover and get framed up for the shots, but don't leave it hovering in the air where the sun's beating down on it and making it warm. We all know what these little fellas are like when we're trying to do software and firmware updates on them. They can get rather hot. Well, you imagine that being in the sky, hovering away, and it's getting warmer and warmer. So just a few tips for you there today. Short video on how to prepare yourself for summer flying. We're quite lucky in this country that we don't get a lot of extreme heat, but last year in 2022 we had temperatures in excess of 40 degrees C in Lincolnshire, which is not too far from me, just up the road about 40 miles. So there we go. So if you're flying at the coast, you're probably going to get some wind, which is going to help with cooling your drone. But we don't like winds, as you know, if flying these little fellas. Although they're fairly good, we don't like strong winds. We've done a lot of videos about strong winds. And a bonus tip, certainly this time of year, when you're flying in the summer, don't forget that it's nesting season for birds. And they get quite territorial. And these little fellows hovering around trees and flying around, well, what could be nesting areas. And that's the last thing you want, is to get a bird attack your drone and bring it down and cause you some grief. So stay away from birds that are nesting. And one final tip is always make sure that you inspect your drone before you take off. This is not just for the summer, this is just a bit of something that I thought I'd throw in. Make sure that you inspect it, inspect your props, make sure there's no cracks, no chips, and that they're in good working order. And just give the old motors a spin and make sure that they're nice and free and they don't feel gritty. One of the things that I learned actually, taking the A2 CFC. So there we go. Hope you found the video useful and informative. You got something out of it at least, then well, give us the old thumbs up. And if you're new around here, why don't you consider subscribing, dinging the dong and all the rest of it that goes with it. And we will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching and happy safe flying in the summer.